What is up, guys? It's Mason once again, and we have another analysis video. So the AYCC, that is the Africa Youth Chess Championships, recently ended, and the winner was Simpson Michael of South Africa. So I just thought we'll look at some of the games that he played against the higher rated players, and yeah, get to see how well he played and if there are any things we can learn from him. But before that, if you want to see more and more of these content where we look at African player games or even the youth player games, or even any other analysis games in general, you can always like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help me out. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So here we have Michael versus I don't know how to pronounce the first name, so Bongolethu. We have knight f3, as always. My screen does that. So we have knight f3, knight f6, c4, c6, an English opening. I realized that he always starts with this knight f3 move as white, at least in the games that majority of the games that I saw. And I realized that, I mean, that's a more flexible way of starting. Usually I didn't understand what Grandmaster meant by flexible, but you can switch into so many different types of openings when you don't start with a very definite like e4, d4 push. So we have d4 here, d5, e3, bishop to f5, and then knight c3. Now we are transposing to sort of a Slav defense over here. And as I was analyzing this game, that's when I made this line. So this position began to look more or less like a Queen's Gambit declined, or even a London system where my opponent rushes with this move, right? And I'm aware of these lines where you can go for like a queen to b3 and force, and if you can forcibly force a trade of the queens, white has a very nice position, and that's basically what happened here. But first, white started with the move knight to h4, targeting that very annoying light squared bishop. We have bishop to g6, bishop to d2, bishop d6, and then finally queen to b3, putting pressure on this side of the board. Now you can play this move b5, but it does create weaknesses for you, right? When I was laying down the Queen's Gambit decline, c6 is quite a very big weakness that you don't really want to allow, and that's mostly what you get. So there are times you actually get moves like queen to c7, which runs into these types of ideas like rook to c1. But here we have queen to b6, and here you don't trade. You actually want your opponent to initiate the trade here, and it gives you a very nice position. I actually had this position against Thompson in the nationals. You can even check that analysis. Though I messed up, you could see that I had a very strong position. The difference between his position and my position is that I had an active bishop here while he had Thompson's bishop was here. So here we have the move c5, very good. Queen takes, pawn takes, the bishop goes back. And now the plan that white goes for here is to simply go b4, b5, trade off the b pawn for this c pawn, and now your opponent is going to have this backward c pawn and this isolated a pawn, which is easier for you to attack as white. So we get b4, knight b to d7. I mean, you can't play a6, but usually with my experience, you might even allow that whole thing to happen, because if your opponent goes like a6 here, for example, I mean, even with the knight here, it's even worse. I can't actually do this, and you might say, okay, but you can do this. Yeah, I do have this, and after takes, you are putting yourself in trouble. So stopping it is not really one of the ideas you want to go out for. So knight b to d7, and we get the b5 move, castles. He doesn't. One of the things I liked about his gameplay, maybe it's common when you improve your chess, but one of the things I loved is his patience and his maneuvering. We'll get to see more games where he played like a very interesting chess. So finally, he cashes in and captures the bishop. So now, even though this is a good bishop, even though both of them have good bishops, white's position is much more preferred. So now pawn takes, and then he plays f4. I mean, f4 is fine. You are trying to get a hold of this e5 square in case your opponent tries to get this e pawn push. So it makes sense. But ideally, a more acceptable pawn push is f3, preventing any entrance of the knight. I mean, if you look at the pawn structure, we do have a sort of like Carlsbad pawn structure, and those are the kind of themes that run with the Carlsbad pawn structure. But f4 makes perfect sense. We have rook f to e8, bishop to d3, rook e to d8, king f2, knight g4, king f3, f4, h3, knight g to f6. Finally, he cashes in on with the pawn here, and now you can see the weaknesses I'm talking about. This pawn is backward, it cannot be defended. This pawn is also backward, it cannot be defended. And the only person who can attack here is white. Unless white makes a mistake, I think you almost always can win these types of positions. So here he plays the move rook to a6. Then his opponent goes knight to b8, and the rook goes back. Now, normally we talk about one move threats, but this is more than a one move threat, because what he does with this move is that, first of all, he undevelops the knight and disconnects the rook. Then he brings the rook back, but not to a1, but to a2. So it's more or less like he used the threat to develop with tempo, and at the same time, he messes with his opponent's coordination, increasing his pressure on this square as well. So now we have knight to e4, kind of like forcing the trade of bishop here. And this bishop was doing very well on this square, but he traded it off here. I mean, the knights are better in close position, so it also makes some sense why you'd want to trade that off. The king goes into e2. Now the kings are coming in. We have the doubling of the rooks, and now we have a6. And you could say that black has sort of solved his problems, because every weakness currently has been solved. But then again, these guys cannot move. At least for the time being, these guys cannot move. And we are in a close position. So what you are aiming for is pawn breaks. And the only person with a decent pawn break here is white. So white is the only one who can hope for anything in this position. So we are going to have a lot of maneuvering here. First, we have h4, preventing anything here. The rook coming in here is no problem. We just lock out the position. Rook to a7, knight to b1, rook to b7, knight to a3, rook d7, knight c4, king e7. I mean, the knight would love to come in here, but the bishop is preventing that. Eventually, we get g3. The rook tries to come in. Bishop takes a stake here. You really can't let the bishop go. You really need to guard some of these squares, right? You really can't let the bishop go easily. Like, the reason I'm saying that is you might want to try and bring your rook here to kind of give you a chance at doing something. But the moment the bishop leaves that square, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So more maneuvering, and then eventually we get this move g4. The pawn break works for white. The rook goes back to d8. King comes in. The rook tries to defend the position. You get a re-maneuvering again of the knight, and then eventually black accepts the pawn break. The king takes, rook h8. There's no problem there. That's just one attacker, there's one defender. The knight finally jumps in. He now has 3 attackers. This pawn cannot be held anymore. Pawn push. Pawn push, I think you just bring the knight back, and then it's still under attack. You can't really defend the position. We have bishop to b8. The knight finally cashes in. Takes. The king moves away, making space for the bishop, but this is not a problem. Bishop comes back defending. The bishop makes a move basically, and now we just continue our assault. Trade of the rooks, and this position is basically winning. Only white can win this position. Pawn takes. The king is too far. He develops, gets into an active position. Pawn push. This does not work. Takes. The pawn is pushing, right? The pawn is pushing. Now, even if your opponent gets in front of the pawn to stop it, you can always come back and then win these guys as well. So very, very beautiful game from Simpson. Very, very nice. And you see the same themes in all his games, where he plays openings where he like spoils his opponent's structure positionally, like he plays more positional kind of chess, and sometimes he goes uber aggressive once the opportunity is presented to him. So a very nice first game from Simpson here. So let's move on to the next game against Son Hee-jae. Sorry, let's just go this way. Son Hee-jae. Again, we have knight f3, d5. We have e3, c5, d4, and this is looking to me like a Collie system. We have e6, and then we have c4, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, and we have this sort of like symmetrical Tarrasch defense. C takes d5, e takes d5, and now we have bishop to b5, a6, and now you trade off. And again, these are the types of openings that he goes for. Isolated pawn here, backward pawn on the c6 square, and you have, depending on how you calculate pawn islands, I don't really know what's the generally accepted way, but some people use the empty spaces as islands. I personally look at the pawns. I don't know what's the accepted way. So you could say black here has 3 pawn islands, which is a lot of weaknesses. Not just that, but this hole, which can be made a hole, for example, if pawn takes, this hole is a very good square for the knight that the knight can occupy, or even you can just hold out. It's a very nice position for white here. I mean, it's not a big win. There's no winning the position here, but I think white is much more preferred in such a position. It's evenish, but it's much more preferred. We have castles, bishop to d6, d takes c5, bishop takes c5, deflecting the bishop. It's a very common theme, even in the Queen's Gambit declined. After your opponent pushes the bishop, then you capture, moving into another square it didn't want to go to, so that if it wants to come back here, it has to spend another move. The added benefit of this is that after b3, your opponent can't like interrupt with something like this. Of course, the knight defense, but something like that can be done. Bishop to b2, bishop to g4, h3, bishop h5. The knight remaneuvers. The bishop again is opened. The knight is trying to get into this square, targeting the bishop again. We have knight to e4, good square for the knight. Knight f4, bishop takes, queen takes, and then we have queen g5. Now, going for this is actually just a big mistake. I was analyzing the game and I was like, bro, why didn't you just like play this move? That's a nice fork. Yeah, but after queen to g4, you are being threatened with a checkmate, so you don't have that time to defend this. You go g6, rook f to c1, targeting this. Not necessarily this, it's an x-ray. You want to target the back pawn. Knight jumps back defending, but then a very nice move here. Rook takes c5, and after knight takes, the rook comes back in. The rook jumps back. Rook takes, and if your opponent comes in here, rook takes, queen takes. You can trade off the queens first, if I remember. Then you have knight in here with very annoying threats to your opponent. But the engine stop line was knight to d5. Interesting because of the weaknesses, right? Getting here and all those type of things. These weaknesses are very big enough for you to actually consider such a move. But that's not where we are. Let's go back here. So we had queen to g5 rather. Rook to c1. That move was always going to be played. The rook comes in to e4. Queen g4, queen takes g4, h takes g4. Rook to c8, defending against this. So it kind of begs the question, why did the rook come here first and not here? Rook to c2, doubling up. The bishop goes back. You double either ways, takes. And now you have this position again where black is to be preferred. A very active bishop and very weak pawns, right? The only, I think, pawns that are quite strong here for black are here. F3 is a very nice move. Rather than just taking the pawn immediately, you play F3, force the knight to this D6 square, so that after you capture with tempo. Tempo is always an important thing. And he does a very funny maneuver here to get this position. And then eventually F5, knight D3, bishop goes to C3, A4, pawn takes, H5, rook takes, attacking the knight. The knight doesn't really have much squares it can go to. Knight to C1, bishop to d2, and now the knight is trapped, right? You can't really go anywhere. If you go here, it's captured. If you go here, it's captured. If you go here, which looks like a check, you just simply come here and the knight has no good squares it can actually go to. So he just succumbs and goes knight takes a2, and if you studied knight versus bishop, this guy is going nowhere. We have a5. Now the rook defends the pawn. Is that what happened? Yeah, pawn takes, f takes, and then we have rook to b8. Actually, I think I played rook to b8. I think it was in this position that black resigned, because there's nothing you can actually do here. If you want to try and get the knight free, for example, rook to b8, which is what I was playing. After pawn push, if the knight jumps back, bishop takes, rook takes, you just play pawn push again. And there's no way to stop this, because here, check, the king has to move, and then you promote. And this is the winning position for whites, right? There's nothing you can do here. So it was in that position that it was in this position that black resigned the game. Another win, and against a stronger opponent. The first game was against an 1800, 1900, and he methodically controlled the game. Basically, he picks these. It's just something I realized. He picks these openings and positionally just conquers his opponent. And sometimes just one small nuance. It's not so easy to see this like queen to g3 as the mistake, or even rook to e8 as the mistakes. It's just very like small moves that he uses to make a big difference, and that's one of the things I loved about his games. So now we look at the final game. Oh boy, this is what happens sometimes. Don't worry, it's part of the whole thing. I don't want to record this for the 7th time. Okay. It's one very interesting thing when you're recording. You record, you make some big mistakes, you have to start the recording again. You record like 7 times, and you realize that at the final recording, you've left things out, and you're like, I don't want to record again, so I'm just going to post it. Anyways, so we have Simpson again versus Levi, or Levy, however you want to pronounce this name. And this time, he's playing as black. So we have e4 from white. We have c5 as Sicilian. Knight f3, knight c6. And then we have the Rossolimo. Knight f6, e5, knight goes into d5, knight c3, knight c7, and then the bishop goes back to e2, which is, I mean, it might be theory, but it just looks strange just backing out over here. It's possible he was afraid of taking and allowing his opponent to get this, but I don't see where the problem is with that move in particular, because I think you can just take here, because going back seems to make everything you did there pointless. Right, so bishop to e2, we have g6, d3, knight to e6, and then we have h4, h6, bishop to e3, bishop to g7, attacking this pawn, and queen to d2. Queen to d2 is a very like telling move. Whenever your opponent gets a chance to castle kingside and they don't, and they play a move like this, you are presuming that they're going to castle queenside. We have queen to c7, another attacker to the pawn. But this move is slightly inaccurate because you allow the move knight to d7. But it's possible he planned this, and we'll get to that. So here he goes queen to b8. Now, when you look at the position, I think most people would prefer white here. Black seems to be like very passive. His pieces aren't too active. The king is stuck in the center, very unsafe. So if anything, the first thing that will come to your mind is, okay, my opponent wants to castle kingside, right? So you can start making plans towards your opponent castling kingside, and I think that's a granted good idea you can go for. But white plays castles queenside. Again, that makes sense. You're expecting your opponent to castle kingside. Sorry, white castles queenside, and you're expecting your opponent to castle kingside. But the problem is this. Look at the queen and the rook. They are primed and ready to attack your kingside. So whereas in the previous position before castles, it feels like white is the one putting the pressure, and white is going to have a hard time defending. Now black seems to castle to a place where white is seemingly stronger, right? If this bishop opens up, things are not going to work in your favor. So yes, he does seem to calculate the position and say that, okay, I have a very strong attack on my opponent's kingside. Going queenside is the best way to facilitate this attack. But a little bit further, and maybe he would have considered that these guys actually will get the attack started before me. So let's go. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. Already we are threatening checkmate. So we have the move here, c3. And what does c3 also do? What does c3 also let us see? More weaknesses. b5, trying to chip away at the pawns. We have f4, queen to d6, h5. So white is also trying to get his attack going. We have rook to b8, b3, another strange move. Like, I get it. I get what he's trying to do, because you don't want to maybe allow your opponent to take, and after pawn takes it, like, you don't want to allow this kind of weakening of your structure, right? Because if pawn takes, you are allowing like bishop comes in here with check. So you don't want to allow that, and that's why you play this move. But there's still so many dark square weaknesses. Bishop to b7. We have knight to d4. Bishop takes, pawn takes. Rook comes into c1. Rook d to c1. Bishop takes. Bishop back to g7. Again, this bishop is deadly. And you can see how he's taking his time here. I personally, when I was analyzing this game, there were some moves I were thinking he should just play instantly. Like, why didn't he capture here long ago? He could have done that. But sometimes he's just able to take his time, reorganize his pieces, and then go for the intended plan. I think that's very high level I struggle to do that, but he seems to understand. He just seems to understand it. We have queen to e3 here, and the pressure seems to be piling on. We have e6, the bishop goes back, and the most unexpected thing, I did not expect this. Maybe it seems obvious, but I did not expect this in the least. Black castles kingside. I'm like, what? I'm like, literally, what? Castling into the fire. But the truth is, how many moves do you think it would take for White to make a meaningful attack? That's the question you should ask. Right? You could say, okay, he has this move, but then you should realize that moves like these are also costly. And you still have a lot of dark square weaknesses, right? So, like, how many moves will it take to make a meaningful attacking position? Quite a lot. Whereas, it's much quicker for Black to make moves that will scare White, or make moves that White has to respond to. So in a sense, it makes perfect sense. So here we have G3, A5, king goes into C2, and then we play A4. The rook comes in to defend. Pawn takes, oh my goodness, G5. G5 is just crazy. I personally wouldn't make a move like this because it seems like I'm weakening my position. But G5 just works here. Of course, your point is not really like you want to take. Like, it's more or less like a kind of like a distraction. You're not really trying to get there. You have like bishop to d4 here, and you are basically going to start stuff, right? You are basically just going to start stuff. I mean, these moves are just crazy. So we have rook h to f1, queen to a6, queen to d2, and now queen to a3. This is more of a slow move. I think his plan is basically to take and then like put the rook here. We have rook f to c1, b takes c4, pawn d takes c4, and now finally rook takes b3. And you're like, wait, didn't he just blunder there? No, he didn't. Because after rook takes, you have, okay, he plays queen takes here. But after rook takes, for example, you just simply have queen check. The king cannot go to any of the dark squares. It doesn't really matter where you go. There's always going to be a check after takes. And yeah, your position is really going to suffer from this point on. So yeah, his opponent tries to counterattack, plays queen takes d7, and now we have rook to e3, and there's nothing you can do here. I mean, there's literally nothing you can do here. After queen takes pawn check, king goes into h7. There are no more checks. There are no more viable threats because this is simply mating one. So you can't say that, okay, I'm trying something of this sort. I mean, even the rook defends that square. There is basically nothing you can do here except sacrifice all your pieces to defend the position, which is what the engine recommends here. So yeah, in this position, Levi or Levy resigns, and yeah, Simpson Michael, very strong player. I really loved his positional style of playing. I mean, I may be wrong that he's positional, but it seemed that way. He plays these openings where he seems to have a positional advantage against his opponent. I mean, in this game in particular, it seemed he had played like inaccurately and his opponent had the edge. But one wrong decision and then he just bests the opening and then wins the game straightforward from there. Anyways, I hope you guys loved this video. If you are fans of Simpson Michael, you should be happy. You should be proud. Yeah, so if there are any games you'd want me to cover, let me know. I'll look at the female section as well and make a video about the winner of the female section. I don't know if I'll be able to do for all the ages, but this is, I think, for the I think this either is the open or the under 19 or something of that sort. Yeah, but thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate your time and your attention. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Join my Twitch streams, twitch.tv/pen_mason. I will see you Mondays, Tuesdays, Fridays, 10 a.m. GMT or UTC, depending on which one you want to use. And I'll see you there. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.